I'd first like to introduce Tom Murphy, who has worked in the PMO and risk management for the past 3 years in Ervia, and has worked on infrastructure projects for the past 15 years. Also joining Tom this morning is Seamus Begley, who works for Irish Water and looks after risk management. So I'd like to hand over to Tom.
Thanks, Anne, for that introduction. So look, yeah, today I'm just going to speak about project risk management in Ervia Major Projects. So the objectives of my talk today, I suppose, is a better understanding of the concept of project risk in the profession, for people today to learn about some useful tools and techniques that we use, a brief introduction to positive risk and also to issue management, and then I suppose encouraging people to make project risk management a habit in how they manage projects. At the back of the slides, I've put in reference documents, which I'd encourage people to have a look at, and I've put in little sticky notes on the slides just to help people identify where they've come from. So look, for those who are unfamiliar with Ervia, Ervia is the parent company of Irish Water and Gas Networks Ireland, and Aurora, which is a subsidiary of Gas Networks Ireland. And Major Projects is one of the parts of the Ervia business. And we support Ervia and GNI and Irish Water in major infrastructure projects. So our vision is to operate as a project management centre of excellence for major gas and water infrastructure delivery. So we've completed 2 projects for GNI in the last couple of years, and we're currently managing 6 Irish Water projects. So our total portfolio value is in excess of about €2.5 billion. So I suppose compared to the portfolio that Seamus is going to talk about later, we would have a lot less projects than asset delivery, but I suppose the average value, budgetary value per project is a lot higher, and I suppose we manage the projects in a certain way to suit those. We use the PMI project management methodology, so PMBOK. A lot of our staff are actually PMP certified. We have an integrated management system, I suppose, which provides consistency and supports our project teams in how they manage projects. And we've been ISO certified since 2017 in our IMS. So what is project risk? So project risk is an uncertain event or condition that occurs as a positive or negative effect on a project's objectives. So I suppose as an engineer 5 or 6 years ago, before I would have had formal project management training, I suppose I would have approached risk as kind of health and safety, kind of threat to life. But in the context of projects, it's contract, it's technical, it's stakeholder, it's cost, quality, and numerous other categories. So I suppose it's important just to set that out. So for today's presentation, I'm going to kind of compare projects to airplane journeys. I didn't attend the seminar back in October. I missed it, unfortunately, but I heard a lot of good stuff about Stephen Carver since, and I've looked at his YouTube presentations and podcasts and so on. And he makes a really interesting comparison of projects like airplane journeys and project managers as pilots. And I suppose, look, there is some similarity. I suppose when you think about a project or an airplane, you've got a schedule and GPS. It tells you how far you've come along the journey and how far you've got to go. You've got a budget, fuel gauge. So you're monitoring how much fuel I have in the tank to get me to the end of the journey. And then risk, I suppose, pilots are scanning the horizon to see what threats are there to them delivering their journey. But is there opportunities made to speed up the journey also? But when we compare effectiveness, I suppose I've looked at the PMI survey from 2021, and I've just highlighted the construction industry there with the red box. So for construction, they're saying 34% of projects are considered failed where the budget has been lost, I suppose, as a sponsor has pulled the project. If we look at commercial flights, the survey from 2021, from a consultancy, and I suppose, look, if you look at the failure rate for commercial flights, it's a completely different order of magnitude. So I suppose this quote popped to mind when I saw this. It's from Aristotle, or it's a slant to what he says, and it's, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act but a habit. And you'd have to say that in the commercial airline industry, they have a culture of excellence when it comes to bringing people safely from A to B. We have a journey in the project management profession to get there. So how do we get there? And I suppose what I'm proposing is that maybe risk management is one of the methods that we do that. we've been flying for maybe only 100 years, but if you look at maybe Newgrange, that was built 5,000 years ago, and I suppose they've managed in 100 years in the airline industry to improve their performance considerably. And our airplane journey is less riskier than projects. I suppose when you think about the complexity of putting a couple of 100 tons of aluminium into the air and moving at 500 or 600 kilometers an hour over oceans, it's a pretty risky endeavor. And they also have to anticipate unknown risks, I suppose. And like on projects or journeys, there are risks that you don't know about until you've progressed along and you have more information. So they managed to deal with this risk. And I suppose really Stephen Carver proposes, and I kind of back what he says, is that probably pilots are highly trained. They go through thousands and thousands of hours of training. They go through simulations and scenarios before they're allowed to fly a plane on their own. And I suppose for project managers, we really need to upskill ourselves so that we're able to deliver projects more consistently and more successfully. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some just really useful techniques, basic stuff that people can take away and try out in their own projects, and I suppose try to encourage them to use it more regularly. So planning risk management. This is probably something in the first year or two working in risk as I've done, I wouldn't have appreciated more, but in the last kind of 12 months, I probably appreciated a lot more. So like pilots, they obviously do training, but they have they have a flight plan, they have checklists before they set off, and they kind of set out what they're going to do on their journey. And it's the same with risk management. If a risk management plan basically says, look, what we're doing, when we do it, how often we do it, who is doing it, and why we're doing it. And I suppose when we're talking about building habits, I suppose if you try and document what I'm going to do, you have a better chance of actually doing that. So what I've done is I put some links in the back of the slides about risk management plan templates to help people get to that point a little bit easier. So the PMI have an overview of what's in a risk management plan, and the Crossrail Learning Legacy, it's a large infrastructure project in London, and one of its deliverables is to improve the project management profession in the UK, and they've lots of really useful documents in there. So look, I've put a link to their risk management plans in there. So look, you can take some ideas from that maybe for how you want to plan risk management on your own project. The next step after you plan how you're going to manage risk is to identify risks. So I think it's critical that we don't just rely on project managers, and we don't do that in Ervia Major Projects. We involve a lot of people. So in the bottom left there, you'll see I've put a sticky note around cognitive biases, and I've put a link at the back of the slides to a couple of books that are well worth reading. But really, look, cognitive biases are, I suppose we've all been brought up in a certain way. We live in a certain culture, we live in a certain geographical area, our families are a certain way, we've worked in different organizations, we've experienced different things and certain projects. So that influence how you as an individual see risk, and you will see a certain set of risks. But it's critically important that you involve other people, and not just project management people either, communications people, land and way leaves, finance people, everyone that you can involve is going to help you identify more risk. Pilots are supposed to do this. They have co-pilots, they have radars, they have weather maps, they talk to air traffic control and other airplanes all the time. They have computer monitoring systems on their airplanes. So you're constantly, as project managers, you have to seek out that information. So in relation to techniques for identifying risks, look, the PMI, I suppose, they say to break it up into the past, the present, and the future. The past is maybe relatively easy. You look at your lessons learned or your risk library. The present, I mean, you look at the current project that you're working on. Why is it unique compared to other projects that your organization has delivered? And then maybe what does that uniqueness relate to into unique risks? I suppose the future is probably the one that I struggled with for the first couple of years. And about 12 months ago, when COVID impacted, we used this technique, and it's called a project pre-mortem. And I suppose the whole idea with a project pre-mortem is the opposite to a post-mortem. So you're pretending that the project has died, but in the future. So what you do is you create a really detailed scenario for the project team or the workshop participants. You set it into the future. It's a silent workshop. So what you do then is you give them maybe 15 or 20 minutes to think about that scenario and write down all the issues that they think might lead to that scenario. And this technique is supposed to be about 30% more effective in identifying risks. So look, I've put a link into the back of the slides for the article, but it's something that I actually would really encourage people to try and utilize. But I suppose when I was preparing for the slides for today, I was wondering, why don't people do risk management more? And after working in it for 3 years, I think it's the identification process. A lot of people do it at the start of a project, and then they put maybe it onto an Excel file or risk register, and they never look at it again. And I think people subconsciously are afraid to get involved in risk management, because the more people you talk to, the more risks you identify, and it's a lot more work for the project manager and PM. And look, it's quite understandable, but there's a little bit of a fear of additional work. But look, the PMI and other organizations have come up with techniques to manage that. So qualitative risk analysis basically is a way to deal with that complexity and volume of risk. So basically, look, on the left-hand side, you have a heat map. So what you do is you assess heat risk. How likely is it going to happen in a 1 to 5 scale, and what is the impact of my project's objectives on a 1 to 5 scale? You give a score, impact by likelihood equals to a score, and then you rank all the risks. And I suppose this is what we need to do as strong and competent risk managers, is we need to not be afraid of risk identification, but we need to be strong enough to say, okay, I'm only going to focus on my red risks or my amber risks or my green risks. We can't manage all the risks all the time. It's all about risk prioritization. But I suppose it's important that we constantly do identify the new risks, because it's important that we are managing the right risks at the right time. Otherwise, they're going to come back and bite us. We do some quantitative risk analysis in the Ervia Major Projects. We do it for schedule and for cost, and Seamus is going to talk about how they, into a bit more detail about cost risk analysis in Irish Water Asset Delivery later on. But I suppose really what risk QRA is about, I suppose, is look, risks are time and money. It's like in an airplane journey. Pilots have to deviate off path. You might have seen the stuff that's happening in Belarus at the moment, and it's adding journey times to pilots there, I suppose. So look, you have to deviate. It's never as straightforward in a project A to B. You always have to do ups and downs, and you need a little bit of fuel in the tank to get you there. Pilots can't afford to run out of fuel, because they'll basically crash. And us as project managers, we have to get to the point where we do have enough fuel in the tank. But conversely, we don't want to be putting too much in there either, because you're tying up a lot of capital if you allocate too much contingency. So QRA is a method of maybe doing this to a bit more of a accurate approach. So when you've kind of identified all the risks and analyzed them, you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to actually manage these key, we'd say, red risks? So we've been using risk bowtie for the last couple of years in major projects. I put a sticky note there about the Institute of Risk Management. We came across some training that they provided, and I've a link to their website, and they do a lot of really useful risk management training. But basically, look, the risk bowtie, in the middle, you have the focal point, and that's basically where you describe the risk. At the causes then is, what are the causes or facts that might actually lead to that risk happening? And then to the far left, you have the consequences. So you document, okay, if that risk was to happen, what are the impacts on my project's objectives? What you do then is you look at the proactive controls. So what can we do to stop this risk from happening? And then you look at the reactive controls. Okay, let's imagine that the risk does happen. What can we do to minimize the impact? And I think it's probably one of the more useful techniques, really, to figure out how to manage risk and put in some effective controls and actions. Again, we're caught for time. We have to make sure that the actions and mitigations we put in are going to work. Once you've done all that, then I suppose you're continuously monitoring. Like the pilot, you're scanning your horizon, you're talking to air traffic control, you're constantly monitoring. And this is something that I think that we do quite well in major projects. So about 2.5 years ago, what we started to do was we do a weekly catch-up or monthly catch-up with our project teams. Now this works in our situation because we have a relatively low number of projects, but I suppose the principle of what we're trying to do here, I think, is what people should be trying to think about. So we sit down with each project team, we have a chat to them. Sometimes it's only a quarter of an hour, sometimes it can be up to an hour, depending on what's happening on the project. And they tell us what's happening, and we trend up the risks on the risk register, depending on what's going on in their project. What we also try and do is, as we're going through the week, we share what other teams are telling us, and we also share what's happened in the previous month's meetings as well. And then the first Thursday of every month, what we do is we gather all that information, we do a debrief as a risk management team, and we present the information then to the senior management in major projects. And I suppose what this is helping to do is it's making sure that our projects and our senior management are really well informed, and it's improving decision making because they're up to date with what they know. I suppose it also helps when we're updating stakeholders. We're more confident in our information. So look, it's working for us. We mightn't do it in this format forever, but it's working for us now. And the principle of monitoring is really important. I suppose, look, the benefits of reporting about risk is it helps each other. So like a pilot, as you're flying across the Atlantic, you might experience really bad turbulence, or you might see something that isn't picked up on radar or on other scanning devices. So if you see something and you communicate it to your fellow pilots, it's going to improve the performance of all their airplane journeys. And it's the same, I suppose, in project management. It's about communicating risks to other projects and across the portfolio, and it's basically, you know, rising tide lifted all boats. I suppose it's critical to report all that kind of stuff. I suppose an enterprise level and in a company, we talk about enterprise risk management, and basically you're just doing that at a global level in your company. So it's not just about projects. You have operations, strategy, shared services, supply chain. So they all have risks in their own units, and risks in their units could potentially impact in your projects. So by being up to date and what's happening across the business, you have a better chance of delivering projects that are actually delivering benefits for the project, for the company in the long term. So when I come back to our description of project risk, so there's a line in there and the word is positive. And I suppose maybe even the language I've used over the last kind of 10 minutes has probably been maybe more threat focused, negative. And I suppose the way, if we look at opportunities in projects, I suppose, and we compare to airlines, so like an airplane, you might get a headwind behind it, and it might, you know, decrease your journey time to we'll say to New York. You might use less fuel. It's the same in projects. You might find out that you've less a cost item, and one of your line estimates might be a little bit lower. Productivity might be better. You might be able to take out scope that you don't need anymore. So you're constantly trying to do this, and I think as engineers we intuitively do this, but I suppose putting a framework about prioritizing which ones we need to look at is important for performance. So look, where is the industry going in relation to project opportunity management? So I suppose if you look at these bars, I suppose what it's telling us is that more organizations are looking at opportunity management, not just threat management. And the item here, item C here, the column C, I suppose when we talk about integrated processes for both threats and opportunities, it's gone from 38 up to 47% since 2001. So that's kind of what we're trying to do in major projects. We want to follow where the industry is going, and we're trying to develop that. For people, it is quite hard to find opportunity management literature in relation to projects. Anything I've read is very threat focused, or subconsciously it feels like it's talking about threats. We came across this book about 12 months ago. It was only published in 2019. It's a really good book. It's very relatable, really good examples, and I would encourage people to maybe have a look at it. We've got a lot out of it, and it's definitely going to inform some of the stuff we're going to do major projects in the coming years. I suppose I'm just going to touch on issue management and how we manage issues in major projects. So look, basically, look, issues, you've either got known risks or unknown risks, and they become a reality. So what you do is you put them onto an issues log, and I suppose they are prioritized by a project management team for management then, because they're actually happening. I suppose as I was writing up these notes today, and the last couple of weeks, it actually struck me that issues log has a negative connotation. I suppose when we were talking about our opportunities, we probably need to talk about positive issues as well, and maybe delineating that as well. And that's something we probably need to think about in major projects. But once you document what's happening with issues and it's got its own journey and it reaches a conclusion, you need to put that into your lessons learned then. And then the lessons learned feeds your risk library. And it's a continuous loop of continuous improvement then. I suppose what you're hoping to do is through the risk library, you're increasing the quantity of known risks that you know about. So it improves identification, improves management, and improves maybe contingency estimation as well. But it's a continuous movement. It's where high performing organizations need to get to. So you're probably thinking, okay, Tom works in the risk management team for PMO, and he's obviously going to champion risk management. Major projects, you know, they have a relatively low number of projects, and like the projects are high value, so they can afford to do this. I don't know if I really have time for all this kind of stuff. So look, I've pulled out a few bits that just worth thinking about. So the PMI did a study in 2015, and they looked at high performers and low performers. So high performing project managers, I suppose, looked at they meet their goals 90% of the time. Low performers 36% of the time. High performers waste 13 times less money than low performers. High performers use risk management 83% of the time frequently, only 49% of low performers. So that's kind of what's happening maybe in the project management profession. The public sector, look, I suppose, look, it was well publicised. The issues that the Children's Hospital had a couple of years ago. There was a public document that was issued, which is the PwC report. And if you look at that report, and I would encourage people to have a look at it, risk is in there. If you did a word count on risk, it's in there dozens and dozens of time, and it's informed the public spending code. So we're delivering projects which are using taxpayers' money. It's critical that we manage risk really well, and I'd encourage organizations in the public sector to really look at the public spending code and risk. There's some useful stuff in there. Private sector, I came across this quote a couple of weeks ago when I was reading a book. This well-known person was asked to sum up their leadership style, and his response was paranoia. And he kind of said, basically, I want to be in a constant state of high alert to mitigate any threats, and I want to make the most of any potential opportunities. And that person was Michael OLeary, who you probably all well know. You might like or loathe the man, but you have to say Ryanair has been quite a successful organisation for the last 2 or 3 decades, and it's obvious that, look, they're very good at managing both threats and opportunities. So look, final words, I suppose, for people today. I suppose, look, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. This is what a US general said in World War II. So, like a pilot, we have to be continually monitoring not just our budgets, we have to be checking our schedules, and we have to be checking risk. Like a pilot, we have to be training continuously. So we have to be learning and practicing new risk and project management techniques in the kind of quieter times, so that you're prepared to use them when you need to use them. And it's just combining both of these, then this is going to help you make better decision making at critical decision points when things are not going to plan. Every scenario cannot be in a standard operating procedure. So like a pilot, they have techniques to, get out of a tricky situation through their training, and the same with project managers. We need to have loads of techniques which basically help us frame the project in a different light, and help us to figure out solutions. I would encourage people to look at risk as both threat and opportunity. It can only help performance. We have a journey in major projects to go on this, but I feel it's definitely going to help us out. A strong risk management culture can enhance all parts of your business. I suppose, look, as people progress through their careers and they might go into different parts of the business, having an ability to actually manage threats and opportunity and look out for it can only enhance your own personal performance in your career. And I suppose, look, if you're aiming for project management excellence in your career, make risk management a habit. It can only help. So look, there's a couple of slides there for links, and I won't go through them, but people can access them after. And look, thanks very much for your time, and hopefully we get some questions afterwards. Thanks very much.
Okay, we'd now like to hand over to welcome Seamus Begley from Irish Water, and Seamus is going to present risk and value. He's the risk and value lead with Irish Water in asset delivery, and Seamus is going to present the second half of the presentation today.
Thank you, Anne. So I'm the risk and value lead for Irish Water, and today we're going to look at quantitative risk analysis within Irish Water. Can I just ask, Anne, is my presentation visible?
Yes, it is, Seamus.
Okay. So just quickly on Irish Water, we currently manage over 1,100 wastewater treatment plants, 791 drinking water plants. We're managing 25,000 kilometres of sewer network and 63,000 kilometres of water network. And so far we've invested 3.9 billion in Irish Water infrastructure. So today's presentation, what we're going to cover is that we're going to cover just the basics of risk management. This is to ensure that everybody is familiar with the terms that we use, and there are various ways of evaluating risk, and I want to share the basic building blocks of how we put together a risk management framework within Irish Water, and specifically in asset delivery. Once this is shown, we'll then show how we use Monte Carlo simulation to carry out quantitative risk analysis, and the purpose of this is to generate an appropriate amount of contingency for the risks that are identified. I'll also briefly just introduce the idea of managing contingency at a higher level, at portfolio level. So previously, what has happened is the standard method is that contingency is allocated to a project based on a straight percentage of the project sum. We've moved now to using the risk register and the values that are on that to generate an appropriate amount of contingency using QRA. So that's the direction of travel. So on the left, you can see the standard definition of risk, and the graphic on the right is the distilled version of what's in the ISO 31000 standard of risk management. So it's the basic, the most basic form of risk management that covers everything else comes from this. So step one is that you identify, analyze, and evaluate. Then you decide what you're going to do about those risks that you have identified. And then step three is that you try and learn from your experience to inform future projects and benefit the organization. So everybody does this in their day-to-day working lives and in their lives outside of work. If you can think that when you're crossing the road, which everybody used to do every day, the first thing you do is you look both ways to see if there's any traffic coming, and then you make an assessment of how far that traffic is away and the speed it's traveling at, and whether there's anything obstructing your view. So this is the step one. Then in step two, you decide what you're going to do. Will you cross now, or do you wait, or do you walk up to the pedestrian crossing, and then will you run across the road, or just walk across the road? Then finally, when you're safely on the other side, you mentally review how that decision went, and you'll obviously spend a lot more time thinking about your actions if you've had a near miss or something unexpected happens. So risk management is basically putting a structure around this process and these activities, and we've developed tools to help us with that, and so that we can benefit from these experiences. So within Irish Water, in step one, to identify risks, we have a risk breakdown structure, and this is basically a comprehensive list of risks, and it's based on the previous experiences, collective experiences of the organization and the different people involved. We've structured and categorized it in accordance with the source of these risks. There are other ways that you can categorize risks, such as by supplier or by the project phase or the size of the impact. But whatever way you decide to categorize risks, it should be appropriate to your organization. So this is our risk breakdown structure over here on the right. It shows the different sources of the risk, and this is an excerpt from our risk breakdown structure. We just say at this stage that all our risks are codified, so that in the exam, what you can see here, that risk 1.01 is always rock, and risk 2.01 is always access to land. And in this way, that it'll allow higher level analysis at a future date, where you can just pull out a certain code, and it means that you don't have a huge effort to trawl back through old risk registers to recode things when you want to solve a problem or look at a particular risk. Another step we do in risk analysis is that we use the cause risk effect method, and that means that every risk, rather than just existing as a description on a risk register, should also be evaluated in terms of its cause and its effect. So simply like X happens because of Y, resulting in Z. And by employing this method, you really focus the conversation in a workshop setting, so that it's no longer just a chat about risk, and it turns into a very structured conversation about how you deal with this risk. And you find when you use the cause risk effect method that the mitigation measures become very apparent. So this is an example of one of our risk registers, and you can see how we've structured the columns on it to capture the cause risk effect and the various other information about mitigation. So we're now on to the risk evaluation. And at the early stages of the project, we use a 1 to 5 rating scale, similar to what Tom had discussed earlier. But each point on the scale is equivalent to a percentage value of the project sum. And this is entered on the risk register as the most likely impact. To create a 3-point scale from that, the minimum value on the 3-point scale is 50%, and the maximum value is 150%. It's just, it must be said that the purposes at this stage is not to get an incredibly accurate evaluation of the risks. It's just to rank them in terms of their potential to affect the project, and this shows the project team where the design effort and risk mitigation effort should be focused on. But saying that, we still need to have an idea of how risky the project is overall, and we think that the rating system that we do use gives a good balance between the speed of estimating a risk and at least getting a full picture of the values of that project. Later on, as the project is approaching execution stage, the ratings fall away, and we're asked the project teams to come up with real 3-point estimates when they have better knowledge of the project. So at this stage, the end of step 1, we have a list of risks in order of importance, their cause and effect, and the mitigation proposals. And using the 3-point estimate, we have a mean value for the potential risk exposure. We're then into the step 2, which is the risk treatment. So the ways of treating risk, we use the 4 T's of risk management, which I'm sure many people are aware of here. We won't go through them all, but suffice to say that not all treatments are 100% effective, and that there will be grey areas in it, and that a residual risk will remain after you've employed one of the 4 T's. Transfer, I'll talk briefly on transferring risk. This is often the preferred option, and the first port of call when it comes to what you do about the risks. And this could be insuring the risks or transferring it via the contract. So with risk treatment or risk transfer, like it's done via the contract, and all contracts are an attempt to transfer risk. There's different approaches depending on the form of contract used, and different forms of contract are more applicable or more suitable for depending on the level of risk on a project. But it should be said that the amount of risk that's allocated to a contractor should have a direct relationship to the contract sum. It's often a source of dispute when a client would think that they've transferred the risk effectively, but they haven't given the contractor enough information to price it. There's various different publications and papers produced about effective risk transfer. Neil G. Bunny in his publication, the 4 criteria of transferring risk, are shown there on the left, and these are very much in line with the old Max Abrahamson principles from the British Tunneling Society. What we generally do at the workshops is kind of ask these questions. So can the person that the risk has been transferred to, can they accurately price that risk in their tender with the information that's available? And has there been a corresponding drop in the risk allowance on your risk register as a result of transferring that risk? And then if that risk was to eventuate, can the person that the risk has been transferred to, can they bear that risk, and can they effectively manage it? And if you've answered no to those, you haven't effectively transferred that risk. And although it might leave your risk register or be massively reduced on your risk register, it can come back and bite you, and you can, then you don't have any money allowed for it in your contingency. So the third step is the review, report and record step. And this is where active risk management comes in. So active risk management is reviewing these risks at regular intervals, and when something changes in the internal or external environment, and taking appropriate actions. It's important that these are done early and that they're checked for effectiveness. And the key part is to record all your efforts and what's happened, so that future projects can benefit from the collective experiences. So now on to the QRA section. So there's two methods. The old standard way of doing it is called the deterministic method, and then the Monte Carlo method is a probabilistic method. So in deterministic, you use a single point for a risk, and that produces a value for that certain risk, and then they're all added together to look at the overall picture for a project. What's the principal drawback from deterministic methods is that it produces a single number, and that can be a good approximation of a mean point, but that number exists in a range, and you've no appreciation from the deterministic method of what that range is. So that's where Monte Carlo comes in. It's more reflective of kind of real world variabilities and what can happen. The downsides to it is that it generally involves very complicated Excel models, or else you need to have a piece of specialized software, and the software itself has got a lot better. And the software we use is Palisades at-risk software. Why we generally use that is that it's an Excel add-on, so that the risk registers are built in Excel, and the Monte Carlo functions that are in the software are applied to the inputs that are in Excel to carry out the Monte Carlo analysis. There is other solutions out there, such as ARM and Crystal Ball, amongst others. It's worth to say that you should be careful of some of these, that although they are good tools themselves, there's a tendency to kind of rely on a piece of software to produce a number for you, and then not be fully appreciative of how that number is put together and how it comes about. So within the Monte Carlo analysis, the basic premise is that it assigns a random number within given parameters that you've entered on your risk register, and it repeats this a large amount of times. We typically use 10,000 simulations, and the results are then analyzed statistically. So in this example, we have a very simplified risk register here. You can see the list of risks, their likelihood, and a 3-point estimate of their impact. We've also included a weighted average there using PERT, the PERT technique. So this is all done just in Excel. So to work out what the best case scenario is, you multiply your likelihood by the minimum impact. In this example, it's about 7K. Similarly, the likelihood by the most likely would give you 31K, which is the most likely scenario. Using the PERT calculation, that's 64,000. And the worst case scenario, by multiplying the likelihood by the maximum impact, is 43,000 or 250,000. In reality, not all risks are going to be in the minimum impact, or not all are going to be in the maximum impact, and it's going to vary at different times. So this is where we use the Monte Carlo. So in Monte Carlo simulation, a random number is assigned based on the inputs that we'd seen before. So on the left there, you can see the likelihood and how that's modeled. So this is a binomial distribution, and it's also known as a discrete distribution. So it can either be one of two numbers, and the two numbers here are 0 and 1, and these represent the probability of this risk occurring. So there's a 75% likelihood in this example of a risk occurring. So 3 out of 4 In 3 out of 4 simulations, this risk will be turned on because the number will be 1, and in 1 out of 4, it will be turned off. Following on from that, the impact is the likelihood is multiplied by the impact. So in the impact is a PERT distribution, which is a continuous distribution. So it can be any number within the blue area. The blue shape is informed by the minimum impact, which is 0 in this case, and that's on the left, and the maximum value is 40,000, and that's on the right. And then the shape of the graph itself is informed by the most likely point, which is somewhere 6,000 or 7,000 there on that graph. So the Monte Carlo simulation picks a random point on that, but you can see that it's less likely to pick a value over at the extreme right. So this is what a simulation looks like, a single simulation. So as I said, we repeat this 10,000 times, but this is just to show you what a single one looks like. So the first blue column here and that I'm pointing at now shows the number that was picked for the likelihood for this particular simulation. So some of them are turned on, some of them are turned off. So the first one there is 20%. So this one is actually turned off. So you'd expect that in 1 in every 5 simulations that number would be 1. The second column, blue column here, is the impact. So this just picks a random number between the minimum and maximum impact, and then the two of them are multiplied together to give a value for that risk for this particular simulation. And these are added together, and that's in the red box up here, and that's recorded as a result of that particular simulation. So that process is repeated in a short period, couple of minutes, and over 10,000 times, and then we look at the results using statistics. So the graph on the left here shows the risk profile. So this is the full range of potential outcomes that could happen given the inputs that we've seen previously. So the best case scenario is that we won't need any contingency, and that's 0. And then the worst case scenario is that we will need approximately 200,000. But both of these values are quite unlikely, given the results. In reality, the results are more likely to be in the middle. So the y-axis shows the likelihood of an event of that particular outcome being achieved. We can take the total area of the graph as being equal to 100%, and then by putting a line, a vertical line anywhere on the graph, and measuring the area to the left or right of that, we can ascertain the probability of that occurrence. So in this example here, only 5% of the area is sitting above 113,000. So that means that in 95% of the cases we'll need 113,000 or less. So we can move this line left and right to kind of assess the viability or the probability of a particular number being achieved. Just turn off this pointer. So on the right hand side there, we have another output from the Monte Carlo simulation is the tornado graph. So it's sometimes difficult to tell which are the most important risks to focus on, given the interplay between likelihood and impact. And the Monte Carlo calculates the principal drivers, the principal risks that affect your project outcome. So it shows where your effort should be focused on. And this is the result. This is a summary graph showing the results, a comparison of the results from both ways of doing it. So you can see there, for the most likely scenario, we are able to arrive at a reasonable approximation that for the most likely that Monte Carlo and the deterministic methods kind of approve. But for the extremities, so for the worst case scenarios, the results vary a lot. So if we were to use just a deterministic method, in this example, we would be allocating far too much contingency to a project. And it's often found and commented on that when projects are over allocated contingency, that money tends to be spent in terms of scope creep. So it's worth saying as well that when you are using Monte Carlo, that any figures that you give, you should always give the corresponding level of certainty, so that the person that you're giving the figure to is aware of the risk involved and how certain they can be over that value. I know I've gone down to single figures here, but the result in this example, but the results should be rounded to the nearest 1,000 or 10,000. Like it's not a completely exact science, and it does have its value, but we're not down to single euro accuracy here. So it's worth bearing in mind. So my final slide is to just briefly talk on portfolio level contingency management. So the basic idea of this is that you manage your contingency at a higher level, and the contingency for a number of projects is pooled together. Is pooled together into a centralized fund similar to an insurance fund, and projects can request a release of that contingency. The reason that you would do this is that it allows for a more efficient use of capital, and your black swan risks or high impact, low probability risks, rather than allowing for these remote eventualities on each project, that you could have a single allowance across a number of projects, and it allows for a greater visibility of where the contingency is being spent, and allows management to kind of see where's the areas that they should focus on in terms of risk mitigation. So thank you very much for the presentation. I'll now hand you back to Anne.
Okay, thank you very much, Seamus, and thank you to Tom also for your earlier presentation. We've had a couple of queries. Unfortunately, I lost my signal on my, I know there were some questions in the Q&A box. Unfortunately, I can't see them right now. I have just one question I'd like to ask myself, and maybe then Tom or Seamus would read the other question there in the, actually I just see one other question there in the Q&A box. Just firstly for myself, I guess maybe more to Tom, you mentioned opportunity management, Tom. What is the biggest barrier to opportunity management, and why isn't it carried out as frequently?
I think people, I suppose last year it kind of, we decided to drive it on last year because of, I think, COVID. We were afraid that people would subconsciously be stressed and anxious, and I suppose when you're like that, you see threats more, you don't see opportunities as much, you subconsciously are looking out for threat. And I suppose in project management, I suppose there are times when you are really busy and you're probably more aware of threats and opportunities, so maybe there's a subconscious thing there. I also think it's just basically maybe just the culture and the way culture within our organizations, and also maybe just the way the language is written in risk management. It just subconsciously it shouts out threat. A lot of organizations talk about mitigating risk. They don't talk about managing risk. So then subconsciously people think about threat. So I think it's a little bit about culture. I think it's a little bit about how documents are written. And I just think it's perhaps just the nature of the profession. It's a busy, it can be stressful at times, and people are more inclined to see threats. So the book actually outlines very well why threats are seen more often. So I'd encourage people to have a look at that book. Actually, it explains it in much more greater detail.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I can see there's a number of other questions now pouring in. There's one here from Flora. It's probably to you, Seamus. It says, with the Monte Carlo method, you said that a randomly determined figure is used. This could be higher or lower than what an actual perceived risk could be. Would you be better off to use the most likely value? Seamus, you need to unmute there.
Yeah, the random value that's picked is within the parameters that are set in the workshop. So when you put a minimum and maximum and most likely value in practice, the random value that's picked is within those parameters, and it is more likely to be in the central bit. It's more like the random number that's picked is more likely to be in the middle of the minimum and the max. So, but there is cases, because you're running it 10,000 times, most of the values will be in the central range, but there is an opportunity for the highest or lowest values to be picked, but it's more likely to be in the middle.
Okay. Thank you, Seamus. There's a question in here from Paul Bennett, who asks, have you any thoughts about risks that can't easily be quantified, such as reputational risk or dispute risk? And that's to either of you.
The risks that can't be quantified, like quantitative risk analysis is looking at risks that can be quantified, and it's not a panacea for quantitative or for qualitative risk management. What we've done before is that we've assigned values for it using our rating scale that just generates a number for it. And that's just to kind of prioritize the risks, and in reality the quantity or the value of it isn't that important. It's suffice to say that it's a big risk, and it's one of the top ranked risks, and we manage it that way. But the number that you generate from the QRA is not that important for things like reputational risk, as long as you know its order of importance.
Okay, thank you. Gulam Gaibi has a question, which would be, would there be in the near future a requirement for people in management to have such qualifications as Six Sigma and PMP?
Yeah, I suppose when you look at a lot of the job roles that advertise in engineering, and you have to be a chartered engineer to do certain activities. Possibly when you look at that metric of the 34% of projects that fail, it possibly does indicate that the competency is lacking in some instances. I know when I came back from Australia, even 6-7 years ago, the amount of organizations that were looking for really good project management qualifications being advertised was there. I suppose it's up to organizations themselves. I suppose if they want to actually successfully deliver projects properly, they have to get people that are qualified. I suppose that's the crux of it. It's like the pilot, you just don't throw someone in without any training, because look, they're more likely going to fail than succeed,
Okay, thank you, Tom. There's a question here from Donica Irish. Donica, unfortunately, the very end of your question is lost. However, I think the main part is, first of all, he compliments both presenters on the state-of-the-art approach to risk management in Ervia and Irish Water. And his question is just wondering, how does one address high impact, low probability risks in any particular way?
So in major projects, I suppose through the enterprise risk management system across Ervia, not just in project management, so HILPS is what Donica is talking about there. They are called out. So in major projects and other parts of the business, HILPS are tagged and on their own separate registers, and even all the ways up to the different risk committees in the organization. HILPS are actually in a separate register, so they are assessed separately from others. So yeah, there is awareness of, like, I suppose a pandemic would have been a 5-1. It's gone up to a 5-5 now, or it's an issue. But yeah, that's how they are separated out on our risk systems.
Okay, look, we have one or two more questions, but I think we really need to start closing the presentation today now. We will give an undertaking that we will respond to those questions that we haven't actually read out and dealt with at the presentation. So I would just like to say thank you to all the attendees today. We'd over 140 online. I'd like to thank Tom and Seamus for providing a very informative presentation on risk management and indeed sharing tips and reference material.